Welcome into the GoVols247 podcast. I am Patrick Brown, joined by Ryan Callahan. We are sitting inside of Neyland Stadium in the visiting coaches booth. I believe, is that where we are? Yes. And a few hours here since Tennessee beat UAB today, 56-24. The 40th win for Josh Heupel as Tennessee's head coach. I'm sure Tennessee has some stats about how quickly he is to that mark, but he was not very excited to talk about it afterwards. Anyway. But we are here. We are excited to talk about this game, and we are live on our YouTube page as well. So if you're watching us there, we appreciate that. Or if you're just listening via podcast, we appreciate that as well. As you would give us a rating and review, whether you're a loyal, longtime, regular listener or checking us out for the first time, we appreciate you in any other way. So any way you consume the podcast. So again, Tennessee beats UAB 56-24 today, moves to 3-1. And Ryan, what your biggest takeaway from this game? Tennessee comes out, there was no hangover from losing to Georgia last week, 21-0 right out of the gates. Tennessee's able to jump on the Blazers, who were around 40-point underdogs, ended up covering with some late scores. But Tennessee is up 28-0 in the second quarter before UAB scores. They tack on a couple touchdowns there right before half. It's 49-10 for the starters come out in the third quarter, have a touchdown drive, 49-10. They were done, played the backups the rest of the game. So Tennessee's able to get out of this game without many injuries and play a lot of young guys and a lot of reserves in the second half. What was your biggest takeaway from this game, Ryan, as Tennessee gets another win?
Well, it's a reminder that it's tough to play a perfect game in these types of games. A lot of times it's just, early kickoff, even though this team practices in the morning, and that sometimes has helped them in these noon type games. It's you're not going to be at your sharpest a lot of times in Tennessee. They weren't bad. They were pretty good in the first half. Took care of business for the most part. Scored on 6 of 7 first half possessions. Led 42-7 at halftime, 21-0 at the end of the first quarter. They're just dominating people in the first quarter this year. 83-7, they've outscored their first 4 opponents. They're back to that kind of dominant first quarter team we saw the first couple of years under Josh Heupel. So I think some people wondered if they would ever get back to that point. I think it's showing that the quarterback play was probably the biggest difference the last couple of years and why they were not that type of team last season and the year before. But yeah, they, I think you mostly got what you needed out of this game. Again, we're not talking about any catastrophic injuries that we know of right now, and that's noteworthy because this team's had some bad injury luck so far. And the passing game continued to work on some of the things that they've done the last few weeks. Joey Aguilar over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, had an interception, but got the receivers involved. Chris Brazzell, early touchdown. Mike Matthews, beautiful deep ball from Aguilar. Got all 3 running backs involved. Peyton Lewis had a better day. So I think just you mostly take away that the offense was looks like the offense that we've seen, and you would expect that against a pretty bad UAB defense. And then on top of that, you would I think the other thing to take away is that they're just this defense. We knew UAB would probably score some points against this defense, but this defense in its current state was some guys missing, and several guys were out today. Just not a tremendous defense that Tennessee has. It's not an elite defense, I would say, is probably the best way to put it, with this current lineup that they have. And they gave up some plays late with their depth kind of being exposed or lack thereof at some positions. That was not an impressive second half effort, but not the end of the world probably in the long run, but we'll see if that's something that shows up a little more as the season progresses. So generally, I think the big takeaway is, hey, you got to hear nothing bad happened, and you can move on to a stretch of 5 consecutive SEC games, starting with the trip to Mississippi State next week, and then you mostly showed some more positive things on the offensive side of the ball, and got a lot of guys in there at least on defense, and they'll have plenty of things to learn from based on what we saw and what Josh Heupel kind of said. Heupel didn't have a lot to say. He was not very chatty in his opening comments, as you mentioned to me earlier, Patrick. What about 20 words you said in his opening statement?
Felt like it, something like that.
Yeah. So it was. I think the fact that you didn't hear a lot from him, that kind of reflects the type of day it was. I think when they look at the film, they'll see plenty of things to correct and work on going forward, but they'll flush it and kind of move on to Mississippi State pretty quickly, I would imagine.
Yeah. Thank you for Donovan Milliken. I hope I said your name wrong or right correctly. Sorry. It was a great segue for him talking about how Joey is the best QB in the SEC. He has, again, another pretty good day for him. I think he started 6 of 6, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns. It took him till his final drive in the game to get to 200 yards. passing, but I don't think that was much on him. They come out, they go right down the field. Tennessee wins a coin toss finally, which they hadn't done in either of the first 3 games, plus the overtime against Georgia. Not only do they win the coin toss, but they take the ball. Josh Heupel Jr. I think likes to defer so he can kind of control the middle 8. But this is probably a game where you're thinking we'd better not be close for the middle 8 to matter a whole lot. So he puts the offense on the field. They go right down the field. Really good, I think, setup plays with some quick wide receiver screens. Then they kind of bluffed one. They got Chris Browse open for his 6th touchdown of the year. I'm not sure what his pace is on, but I think it fell off a little bit from the last couple of weeks. And then Tennessee gets good field position after I think it was a targeting on UAB. 2 plays. Aguilar drops a beautiful one over the top to Mike Matthews. Then the 3rd drive is the interception. Not really Aguilar's fault. Defense makes a play. Guy breaks up a pass. It pops up in the air for seemingly forever, and easy interception there. But Tennessee got the stop in the sudden change situation. And then they got right back to it and were able to go up and down the field. But it got sloppy, I think, after that fast start for the offense a little bit. I don't think a lot of that was on Aguilar, though. There were 3 plays, 3 downfield shots, a couple to Mike Matthews that were broken up. There was a play in the end zone he didn't make, and he said after the game that's the one he's thinking about more than the touchdown he caught, where he joked that he had to break his neck to look back over his shoulder for the play from Aguilar. So, but he ends up throwing, I think, for 218 yards and 3 touchdowns. They brought back the old Dylan Sampson shovel pass for Aguilar's 3rd touchdown to Star Thomas, who I thought had another productive day. Really, all the running backs had a productive day, but you go to the second quarter, the offense is a little skittish. They had the 3 penalties in 1 play. Poor Jesse Perry got called for 2 of them. I don't think the 3rd one was on him. They might have officially called it on him, but he was definitely not the only offensive lineman downfield on that broken play. But they're able to overcome that. But they had a mesh point they put on the ground. There were a couple of leaks in protection where Joey Aguilar had to Houdini his way out of a sack. They had the missed shots downfield. They had to convert some 3rd and 4th downs there in the second quarter. It was a little sluggish after they started. But Josh Heupel wasn't too negative about it. He said, he kept repeating, there's a lot to like about this game, but a lot to work on too. So, like you said, Ryan, this game's never perfect, but the offense, I think, did, you got some contributions from all 3 running backs again. I still think, I wrote this in one of my takeaways, Star Thomas, I think, is this team's best running back right now. And I don't know that I would have said that in the spring. I thought he could be a guy that would help Tennessee, but I think it just seems like the run game is a lot more fluid and efficient when he's in the game. He catches he gets the touchdown on the shovel pass, had a 21-yard touchdown run or 21-yard run, I think, on his first carry, scores a touchdown. But Deshaun Bishop had some nice runs too. I think he may have ended up leading the team in rushing.
I think it might have been Lewis actually after his long touchdown run.
Yeah, Peyton Lewis, him and Joey Aguilar work the speed option really well. Aguilar sort of keeps the defender in no man's land and waits till the perfect, the last possible moment to catch it. And they get Lewis out in the open and his speed takes over. They need to get him going because I think he's a guy that can really help them with some of his skills. Just haven't really got him going. And he kind of talked about how, getting frustrated a little bit. I think he had a moment where he slammed his helmet on the sideline and said that, hey, I got to be a little bit better with my emotions, but admitted that, it's frustrating sometimes when you're rotating 3 guys to get truly in a rhythm, but, they get a productive game from him. DeJuan Morris is a guy we should point out too. He had a long kickoff return, had a long run. He did get caught. I don't know. He probably won't like that in film review, but it got called back for holding. So productive day for the offense. And they didn't have the huge numbers at wide receiver. Aguilar didn't throw for 400 yards, but I think some of the offense's ups and downs were maybe more of the Aguilar supporting cast than necessarily some of his play.
Yeah, I think so. And like you said, there were some good things to point out about almost everyone involved in the offense. You got Miles Kitzelman involved. You didn't have some guys out there. Deshaun Brame wasn't out there. That was a young guy. I thought we might see a little more of a look at in this game. Ethan Davis didn't play, so missing some of the normal cast, more so on defense, but even on offense. So everyone else, pretty much who was part of the regular rotation, you got him involved. I think the lone exception maybe Jack Van Dorselaer. I don't think he caught a pass. I can't remember if he did, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, they spread the ball around pretty well and got everyone engaged. No, actually, Van Dorselaer did catch one pass. That may have been from Merklinger in the second half, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, they did get him. They did get him involved, and so overall, you you got your offense, some more good results to build on, and more experience for those young guys who hadn't been as involved. And yeah, DeJuan Morris, I think definitely one of the young guys that stood out to me. Played a lot of guys, a pretty good number of reps. I'll be interested in seeing the snap breakdown from Pro Football Focus tomorrow to see how much guys like Marion Dye and Ethan Utley got to play in this game. You saw some others get in. Isaiah Campbell played a lot and was working with the twos during pregame warmups and got in there pretty early and did some good things, I thought. So, you got to test your depth a little bit more, and some of it good, some of it bad. And, kind of got the full Boo Carter experience today. You had a muff punt, but then he forces 2 fumbles, makes a few tackles for loss, had a really nice game on defense, it seemed like. And again, some good with some bad. And in a game like this, that's probably to be expected. It's just you're not going to be at your sharpest a lot of times. I mean, we saw Tennessee mess around with Austin Peay a couple of years ago. I mean, really mess around with Austin Peay in that game back in 2023. So, it was nothing like that. The game was never in doubt. And they just didn't, execute to perfection, and some of that because of injuries, even though Josh Heupel wasn't ready to make that excuse after the game. So that doesn't matter. We can't worry about that, basically. So, some things they'll want to clean up for sure, but overall, a workmanlike effort, I guess you could say, not sharp, but not bad either. And, a couple turnovers, some things that the coach will be able to point to and say, we can't do that against a better team. But also, you still won by 32 and the game was never in doubt. So, you get the win, move on. And, again, hope you get healthier getting ready for Mississippi State, because you certainly need some of those guys back, especially someone like Jackson Moy or David Hobbs at defensive tackle, where they were, I think, really, really missing those guys against Georgia last week.
Yeah, Joey Aguilar, 15 of 22, 218 yards, 3 touchdowns. Pretty efficient day. Again, he had Peyton Lewis had the drop earlier. That was one that was not made. He ended up coming back from that and making the plays you mentioned. He led Tennessee with 81 rushing yards. Bishop had 59, Star Thomas 51 receivers. Brazel, a pedestrian, 5 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. Matthews had 3 catches for 53 yards and the score. Our colleague Ben McKee, one of his bold predictions was all 3 guys. So all 3 top receivers would catch a touchdown pass. So they left Braylon Staley out, unfortunately. Staley did have the first big play of the day, a 31-yard catch on the opening drive.
I just noticed my bold prediction of Tennessee scoring on all of its red zone possessions failed based on the final drive of the game, not reaching the end zone. That Jake Merklinger touchdown pass that they couldn't quite complete, that cost me. They were 5 of 6 in the red zone.
Well, that's what happens sometimes with these bold predictions. But you mentioned, full list of guys that weren't out there were Ethan Davis was not on the inactive list that Tennessee put out earlier, and I think he was in uniform and went through pregame warmups, but did not go. I think they said on the broadcast this week, I think he dislocated his shoulder against Georgia, so maybe just trying to give him a week off from contact. So he doesn't play. Brame doesn't play. Still no David Sanders Jr. on the offensive line. And then on the defensive line, they didn't have Jackson Moy, David Hobbs. They held Tyree West today. He started the last 2 games because I think Tyree Weathersby was out against ETSU. And obviously so they had Tyree West start the last 2 games. He's not in today. They start Weathersby alongside Bryson Eason, Dominic Bailey, and Joshua Josephs. The second team defensive line in warmups and in the game, I think they were in on the second series, was, as you mentioned, Isaiah Campbell with Nathan Robinson, Caleb Herring, and Marion Dye. So 2 freshmen in the second team defensive line is what you're getting to because of those guys are out. But Josh Heupel was asked after the game, if you're almost judging the defense differently because, you don't have your top corners, Ricky Gibson, Jermon McCoy, and you don't have Jackson Moy and David Hobbs, who are 2 of your 3 most experienced defensive tackles and probably 2 of your 3 best defensive tackles, almost certainly. And he said, yeah, sure, you can point to it, but no one cares. Like, they're not going to – they'll put an asterisk against the Georgia loss because those guys weren't out there. So we'll see if they can get those guys back, Moy and Hobbs. If you get them back, you have an extra week afterwards to maybe rest them up for the October stretch, but we'll just have to see. Rodarius Jackson, another guy, didn't go. Josh Heupel said on the SEC teleconference on Wednesday that he's out. He was in a sling, so that's going to be more than a 1-game absence. And he took that hit against Georgia on the shoulder, so that's what he's dealing with. But switching over defensively, Ryan, the numbers aren't going to look great. I mean, Jalen Kitna, the UAB quarterback, finished 38 of 51 for 364 yards and 2 touchdowns. A lot of that was in the second half, right? I mean, I think he only had 147 yards on less than 6 yards per attempt in the first half. So a lot of stat padding.
I respected that UAB didn't even waste any time trying to run the ball. They were 19 for 23 total, and that includes the 4 sacks or runs by Jalen Kitna. So really 15 probably called run plays in this game while they threw it 52 times. So they knew what they had to do. They got down early and they just chucked it all around and said, hey, and Trent Dilfer admitted after the game, we needed to score 35 points or more in this game is how we viewed it to give ourselves a chance. So they were being aggressive. You saw a bunch of junk formations. They threw every trick in the book they had at Tennessee, and some of that stuff worked, and that's where some of those yards came from. But yeah, they were pretty aggressive, and we kind of expected that from Trent Dilfer.
Yeah, Tennessee ends up holding UAB to 394 yards again. You look at this, the splits, right? I think that has to be considered. UAB only had 151 yards in the first half and almost 250 in the second half. So a lot of those young guys, as Josh Heupel noted after the game, the tape is proof that you need to, maybe be a little bit sharper if you're a young guy to be more ready for what you might see if you get thrown into the game. But, defensively, I think my biggest take was the secondary. I thought had a nice bounce back, right? The pass defense numbers aren't going to go up, right? You were averaging allowing about 248 passing yards. That's going to go up because you allowed that much. But I thought defensively the secondary was sharp early on. They, Colton Hood makes a great play on the first series. Jalen McMurray gets a break up on that third down to get that stop. I think there was a coverage sack on either the second or third series that made Kitna hold the ball. And I think the sack was, I think it was Marion Dye and Nathan Robinson got there. That was a 4-man rush that you make the quarterback hold the football. I think Ty Redmond had a pass breakup. The 2 star players that started for Tennessee were highly productive in this game. Jalen McMurray, 6 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, half a sack, and the pass breakup I mentioned. Boo Carter, as you mentioned, kind of at the top, had a very Boo Carter giveth and Boo Carter taketh away kind of game. He has a big punt return early that sets Tennessee up with like a 45-yard touchdown drive. That was after the interception, so it gets the offense back on track with the short field. They went right down the field and scored in, I think, less than a minute and a half. And then third quarter, he has the muff punt, that drive in the second quarter. The UAB went down the field. There were a couple of passes in zone that were in his area that there were openings that UAB was able to exploit for nice plays. But he comes back from that and the muff to have 9 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 forced fumbles. One was on a sack, and the other was, I don't know if they gave him credit for the sack. No, they did. One was on a sack, and the other set up a scoop and score touchdown for Caleb Beasley, who scores against his former high school coach, and Trent Dilfer, who coached him, and Evan Spillman at Nashville's Lipscomb Academy. So, Ryan, what do we make of this defense? Is it tough to tell because this is still a matchup where going to the game, Tennessee's pass defense is 108th nationally, and they're going against Jalen Kitna, who has SEC talent. He started his career at Florida, has NFL bloodlines. His dad played in the NFL for like 16 years. And he went in this game 13th nationally in passing. So what do you make of this? Is it good? Is it bad? Are you yelling at Tim Banks? Or are you saying that this was a step maybe in the right direction from last week?
I think it was okay. It wasn't anything special. I don't think it's one you really get excited about, but it's not one that you say, oh, this defense is screwed because they couldn't stop UAB. I mean, as we said, they were very aggressive. They threw out some very exotic looks. They had offensive linemen out at the perimeter. They had, they had one set where there were 4 offensive linemen and it looked like one was missing. So that probably had defensive players confused. I think they scored a touchdown that, or at least picked up a first down in that play, if I'm not mistaken. So, but yeah, they did some things that you're not going to see week to week in the SEC. And I'll give Tennessee credit for this. We talked about the defensive line not having everyone at its disposal. They still didn't give up anything in the run game, really. I mean, UAB really wasn't able to run the ball. So a team that you thought you had an advantage on at the line of scrimmage, you still controlled the line of scrimmage without some of your top defensive linemen. That's still encouraging. And I thought they held up relatively well against Georgia for that matter. So the fact they've played okay through those injuries and not been just gashed in the run game, I think is still a pretty positive sign overall for this defense. It goes to the pass defense, obviously, as you were alluding to. And that's where you gave up some plays against Georgia, 300 yards or so passing with Gunnar Stockton, and then UAB to do what they did today. On one hand, like you said, not shocking that a team like UAB that was, doing everything it could to keep the game competitive and just very aggressive from the start. Not shocking they threw for 300 plus yards. On the plus side, though, they didn't have as much of that in the first half. A lot of that came, more than half of those yards came in the second half. So I think the fact that you were able to limit the damage when you had the starters in there and the backups gave up more of that, probably a little more encouraging. We know their depth in the secondary is not not as well tested. They've got guys like, Timothy Merritt was out there, was the closest guy in the vicinity on a busted coverage that allowed a 61-yard touchdown in the second half. So they had some misplays like that, but those are, there's some young guys out there. And again, UAB threw some pretty exotic looks at him. I don't want to overlook Caleb Beasley's fumble return. You give Boo Carter a lot of credit for ripping the ball out, but certainly Caleb Beasley, he's just one of those guys that has a nose for the football. I saw it throughout his high school career. Trent Dilfer said this after the game, and he's right. It's amazing how many times Caleb Beasley would find a way to score a touchdown in his high school career. So I give him a lot of credit for being in the right place at the right time and making that play to take it back for a touchdown. That's a good development for him. He had 4 tackles, I think, in this game too. You want to see Tennessee get him more involved because he's a young guy they were pretty excited about earlier this year, and I don't think he's had a tremendous start to the season. So a play like that could maybe get him jump started a little bit more. They could use that third safety to come along and be more of a factor with Idris Farouk and Andre Turrentine kind of having a rough game against Georgia last week. You could use a third option there that you can really rely on. They need Beasley to be that guy. And then you saw Christian Gass make his debut. The freshman linebacker edge rusher got in there, had a half tackle for loss. So some young guys got plenty of run. Jordan Ross, I don't think he had a sack today, but he had a couple of nice pressures, at least one that comes to mind. So, still some good things there. If there's anything less encouraging, I thought the pass rush was a little less of a factor today. Now, I'm sure UAB did some things to get the ball out a little quicker and things like that, but not as much. Josh Josephs, his streak of 1 sack per game to start the season ended this week. Didn't see Caleb Herring being as much of a factor. So you want to see those guys continue to show up in SEC play. Maybe not the end of the world that they didn't make plays today, but something that is at least worth noting because it felt like that was kind of the strength of Tennessee's defense last week against Georgia. And today those guys weren't really much of a factor in the game.
Yeah, I remember Ross had a play early. It was the third down where he showed some pretty good power, pushed the UAB left tackle just about in the quarterback. I don't think Jalen Kinnick could step into the throw. It was kind of a downfield back shoulder lob, and it fell short and wide. I think the pressure had something to do with that. I don't think it showed up in the box score. But, yeah, Christian Gass, Josh Heupel mentioned on the Mike Key show on Thursday that he would make his debut. A guy that we haven't seen on the practice field at all because he had an offseason procedure. Doesn't go in the spring, didn't go at all in camp. He was working on the side or inside. So, but he's worked his way back. He's a very intriguing prospect. I mean, you just talk about the guys they've got in this freshman class, and I mean, I don't want to say he's a forgotten guy, but just a really intriguing defender that you said he was. I think you had a Freudian slip there. He was a linebacker prospect. He's working at Leo, and he, to me, looks like a Leo with his length and athleticism. So he gets to make his debut, and that oddly, we would not have said this even a few weeks ago that 4 games into the season, there's only 2 freshmen that haven't played for Tennessee. One of them would be David Sanders. He was like the top, he was the one that was going to be a day 1 starter, and that obviously hasn't worked. We got a question in the comments from Stingray who said, who on defense will be playing from the injury list? And I assume that's a reference to next weekend, who will be back from Mississippi State. Don't think Jerome McCoy will be back. That's not going to happen. Ricky Gibson's not going to be back. He's still in a sling after undergoing surgery. We will see. I would think Tyree West is fine. He, had 7 tackles, started the last 2 games, 7 tackles against Georgia, started the last 2 games. I would think he was probably held out more for precautionary reasons, kind of like with Tyree Weathersby against ETSU. I know our message board had a good time with the Tyree's situation when I was updating the pregame thread that Tyree West was out and Tyree Weathersby would be in starting for him. And we'll have to see about Jackson Moy and David Hobbs. Hobbs has not been in a boot or on crutches in pregame the last 2 games. So he is trending in the right direction. I'm not sure how much he's done in practice with Jackson Moy. It's an arm injury. Ryan, I think you've said in our podcast in various settings that it's maybe a pain tolerance kind of thing. What do you think about potentially Tennessee maybe getting one or both those guys back on the defensive line next week?
I could see one or both of them potentially being back. I think that's still the goal on Tennessee's end. As you mentioned, I think it might be kind of a pain tolerance thing for Jackson Moy. I think he is hoping to get back out there for this game based on the latest I've heard, but we'll have to wait and see. It's going to depend on whether he's up to it. I don't think this week was ever really on the table for him to play, so not really a disappointment that he wasn't out there. And next week was always kind of the goal for him. So we'll just have to wait and see what we hear, and we'll actually get an official injury report again this week starting Wednesday with the SEC mandated availability report coming out each day starting Wednesday. But yeah, that is one we'll be watching closely this week for sure. David Hobbs, I think this week is the first week he could potentially come back from that injury. I've not been given enough of an indication one way or the other whether that's likely, but I know that's been the hope. I did see him walking around after the game. As you said, he's made progress. I think looks like he's back to the point where you could see him getting back involved on the practice field if he hasn't been already, but I don't know to what extent he has been involved, if at all, so far. And that would mean he needs to get in some work. He's got some rust to knock off after missing 5 or 6 weeks here, and that would at least be a test for him to get back out there. It might even be one of those deals where he could have a limited workload potentially coming off an injury like that after missing some time. But, that's a guy Tennessee could really use. I said going into the season, I thought he was primed for a big year, and has the kind of ability that you lost in Omar Norman-Lott, an interior pass rusher that's pretty active and I think was really talented and playing kind of in Tennessee's third pair a lot of times the last couple of years. So to have a guy like that stepping into a bigger role, you need him back out there, and he could certainly be a difference maker if they get him back. So those are the main two to watch this week. I certainly don't think you'll see either of those corners anytime soon. And then it's just kind of a matter of whether anything changes with David Sanders. That's a weird situation sort of to watch. Could be back, theoretically anytime, could still miss a while. We don't really know what's going to happen with that one. And, Rodarius Jackson, as you said earlier, doesn't sound like he'll be back super soon either way, but Tennessee has been mostly rotating 4 receivers for the most part anyway. And he got in there for one play against Georgia and got hurt. So don't think that was a guy that's likely to play a lot of snaps, but still a hit to your depth for at least a little while.
Yeah, a couple more things here before we wrap up. We're not going to dwell too long because it's UAB. Josh Heupel didn't talk a lot in his opening statement, so we're not going to talk a lot on this podcast. But just weird UAB, like the targeting on the punt was weird. I didn't tell who got a crown of the helmet to the face mask. I think that was part when the SEC Network was going out, but they showed it, and I couldn't tell who got hit. But the stomping incident was weird.
Trent Dilfer said he was not happy about that after the game, and he said there will be disciplinary action for he didn't see the full replay, but he had seen an Instagram video of it, he said, and said he did not like the way it looked, but wanted to see the full video, but said he expected the player involved to be disciplined. And Trent Dilfer is a pretty blunt guy, did not hold back on that one. So I'm sure fans will like to hear that, because that was not the kind of thing you want to see from an opposing player.
Yeah, very I don't know where that would have came from. I don't know if somebody taunted him or something, but Jackson Ross, first of all, looked like he was about to take up for his kicker. The specialist, man, they're a tight bond.
And what is it about these types of games? And we saw, was it Akron a few years ago? And I mean, some of these games against non-conference teams that you would think have nothing to do with each other. I mean, maybe a little more crossover with Tennessee and UAB being geographically close, but these teams shouldn't have any reason to hate each other. And yet some of these non-conference games against teams that are not really relevant to each other in any way, shape, or form get really chippy, more so than SEC games. I don't understand why that happens, but Tennessee seems to run into one of those almost every year for some reason.
Yeah, I don't want to throw UAB in the Akron category. Akron was they were well off their own on their own deal. They had the guy diving at the back of Cedric Tillman's legs. They had guys going at knees. They were trying to take Hendon Hooker out at the knees on some of these options. So I don't want to throw them, but that was just odd, and credit Trent Dilfer for saying, hey, we're not going to accept that, because that was weird. And Max Gilbert looked like he was hobbling a little bit. He came back in and kicked and was fine, but you never want to see that. You never want to see cheap stuff like that. That's not necessary. And Dilfer also said that they left their top receiver at home, Corey Milliner. I don't know if that's any relation to D. Milliner, who played at Alabama back in the day, but their leading receiver, like 17 catches, like almost 16 yards a catch. I think he had a touchdown in 5 straight games going back to last season, and he didn't make the trip. And Dilfer after the game was just like, I didn't think we need him to win, which it's kind of funny. But
said something like, just didn't think this is the game he was going to help us win, or something along those lines. A funny way of saying, yeah, our top receiver stayed home.
Well, he was very blunt in his Monday press conference talking about this game being like a chance for his players to get themselves on NFL draft boards, because NFL scouts, if they were interested in a player at UAB, they would watch this game first. But he also was like, hey, our guys could have value in the portal, so if they play well in this game. So maybe he just wanted to deny. Maybe it was conduct detrimental to the team, was what I saw reported. So maybe the punishment was you can't come and, showcase yourself if you want to play somewhere else next season. But one last thing I think we should talk about is not a great day for a lot of the backups, but Jake Merklinger, 3 drives, unless you want to throw in the 4th one there in the last 50 seconds or whatever it was. Didn't look good. Didn't really move the offense. Didn't look comfortable in the pocket. I think he only completed 2 of his first 6 passes before they hit the one in the final 30 seconds. He almost threw a touchdown pass to Braylon Harmon, who played at Catholic, I believe, a walk-on receiver. So I bet he wishes he would have made that play. That would have made probably his career. A guy that some of these walk-ons that are, it's still a thing even with the house settlement, but some of those guys work hard in practice and they get their moment in some of these games. They want to take advantage of it, but I don't think Merklinger took advantage of it. And I know he's the backup, but I think after the second one, I might have given George McIntyre a shot. Again, maybe he's not your backup quarterback, but that I think that was maybe a missed opportunity for Tennessee. And just to see him, because I think he's probably got a better chance of being your starter, or at least in contention to be your starter beyond this season. Now, you never want to, you don't want to operate too far out in the future if you're Tennessee, because you could make the case that Jake Merklinger needs the work too. But would have liked to have seen McIntyre there at the end of the game.
Yeah, I think that's a big missed opportunity, for one, because of what the schedule has for Tennessee the next 5 weeks or next 5 games. You don't have another possible game like this that's at least likely to create an opportunity to get in your number 3 quarterback until probably the New Mexico State game in mid-November. So even if McIntyre is, some people have asked, are they redshirting him or mentioned they think he's on a redshirt track? Even if that was the case, you can play in up to 4 games and still redshirt. I don't think Tennessee's been focused on redshirting George McIntyre, so that was not a reason to hold him out of today's game. And this is one of really 3 chances on your schedule where you might get an opportunity in a blowout to put in a couple backup quarterbacks. So yeah, they got the starters on offense out at a pretty good time. I thought they got only 1 drive in the second half before they took out Joey Aguilar and gave Merklinger the rest of the game from there. But yeah, to not give McIntyre at least 1 drive, I think that's a missed opportunity for a young guy that, let's face it, you never know, you might need him at some point this year. And even if not, that's valuable game time that he could use going into next year, when, again, he could be at least a strong contender, if not the early front runner for the starting job, just because he's going to have a year in the program. And, your other main contender might be a true freshman in Faison Brandon, who won't be here until January. So that's a missed opportunity. I think you hate to see that. And, wouldn't be shocked if McIntyre was a little annoyed that he didn't get in the game today, but that's part of it. Sometimes you can't help those kinds of things. And coaches, it seems like games like this, we're always talking about somebody who didn't get in there early enough, whether it's the number 2 or number 3 at some position. And in this case, I think it's McIntyre that we're looking back at and saying, it probably would have been much more ideal if he'd gotten in there and at least played 1 drive.
Yeah, but I think that pretty much sums up this game, right? We're talking about the 3rd-string quarterback didn't get any action. That's the I don't want to say the big detriment, but I mean that's that just kind of sums up this game, right? Like you didn't see the 3rd-string quarterback. I think that just about says it all. But we have said plenty on this podcast. We'll have plenty of coverage already up on the site. Some takeaways from right at the end of the game. You can see what Josh Heupel and Joey Aguilar said on there as well. We have plenty of coverage on Sunday as well, with some, as you mentioned, the Pro Football Focus snap counts and grades. I'll have a 247 recap looking back at this game. We'll have the new polls will be out. Ryan will have some recruiting action. There were a couple of 5-stars here, including Keyshawn Bowman, who plays at Brentwood Academy, just decommitted from Oregon, right? 5-star in the 2027 class, here for a 2nd straight game. So a positive development there to get him back so quickly. And certainly the way the receivers are playing right now, that would be pretty appealing. It has to be pretty appealing for recruits to see the receivers playing well, like they have so far for Tennessee this season. But we'll have plenty of coverage rest of Saturday night into Sunday, so encourage you to go check it out. And again, if you're listening to this podcast via podcast version, we ask you to go give us a rating and a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening or watching on our YouTube channel, give us hit the subscribe button there too. What was that? Oh, the like. Yeah, very, very, very data hand right there. So the people that are listening couldn't see Ryan do the thumbs up that you do when you hit like on YouTube. So but anyways, we appreciate any of you listening. If you're subscribed to the site, we appreciate you as well. We hope you have a good rest of the weekend. For Ryan Callahan, I'm Patrick Brown. Thanks for listening to this edition of the GoVols247 podcast.